I know that a lot of your work is about sort of cutting through those complexities and that noise, working with business leaders and owners who feel stuck and frustrated, not able to bring their visions to life, and sort of helping them to get clear, focus and organized to achieve their vision and finally feel that ease and flow that we're all
crave.
I think you know, this is such a relevant topic right now. Overwhelm, you know, over the last year, but even now, you know, I think we thought with the new year we would get some respite, and it just doesn't feel that way. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation now. We're going to, as you're coming in, just let us know if you're watching this hashtag live and that you're hearing us okay. And we will, as we go along, please do stick your questions in the comments and we'll pick those out as we chat along, and we'll pick out any comments. If you're relating to anything or would like to challenge something, get those comments in the chat box and we'll absolutely explore some of those. So Wendy, to get us started, I love this question and I think it's going to be highly relevant. But what's your story? Tell us your story.
What's my story? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Jay. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I left my corporate role in late 2019 after having done almost 30 years, yikes, of management and leadership and learning and development roles. In one guise or another. So yeah, as you said, a mixture of both corporate and freelance, mostly in corporate roles. And over that time, I perfected the art of being busy, always doing, always on, always producing, you know, sucked into that busyness. And by the time I hit my mid-40s, I was completely exhausted, completely overwhelmed, and thought I need to do this differently. By that time, I was in a senior leadership role, so it was a big role, and I loved the role, but I knew that I had to do it differently because it just wasn't sustainable. So I started to explore different ways of doing leadership, and I first came across one of many, which some of you, I know you know, Jay, and some of you, the group, might know, which is all about feminine leadership as opposed to the masculine paradigm way of doing things. I focused a lot on my health and well-being, particularly around menopause. I was perimenopausal, although at the time didn't realise it.
For those who don't know those terms, perimenopausal, because I didn't know this term.
Yes.
Am I right in saying it's just before menopause? Is that right?
Yes. So that's a good question because I didn't know about it either. So menopause is a moment in time. Menopause is the last period that you have. Perimenopause is the run up to that moment in time. And what I learned was that can start from any age, from your kind of early to mid 40s. So when I hit kind of you're probably 44, and I was overwhelmed and exhausted, the last thing I thought of was menopause. It just didn't occur to me that it would be menopause. So that can start early to mid 40s and then lasts until the moment that you have your last period. Which for me was when I was 51. So that, kind of 8 years was perimenopause. And then as soon as you've had your last period, you're then into postmenopause. But the kind of hormonal journey can go on, before, during and after in different guises. Yeah. So I did a lot of work on my own health and well-being, taking care of my hormones and how I showed up at work. And then I made the final shift, if you like, in how I guess, and we'll talk about this, I suppose, in a second, around, in order for me to be completely naturally aligned The last shift I had to make was in changing the environment in which I was choosing to be in, and that was the corporate setting. And whilst I loved the job that I did, I knew that working the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and that the hours that were required of me in that role, I just knew it wasn't sustainable for me, and so I left in 2019. And yeah, now, as you described earlier, I'm now working with business leaders and owners and helping them essentially get their stuff done in a more naturally aligned way. So rather than operating from this place of busyness and overwhelm, helping them work from ease and flow.
Amazing. An incredible story, Wendy, and thank you for coming to share it with us. What was life like for you in Overwhelm? What was that experience in a very, very practical sense? Because I think we use these words like exhaustion and overwhelm or burnout, and often people are like, oh, no, that feels too extreme for what I'm dealing with. I'm not dealing with that. And actually, when I talk about some of the symptoms, they're like, oh yeah, that, yes.
Yeah.
What was it actually like for you?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because probably whilst I was going through it, before I got to the point where I felt I was going to topple over if I didn't change, I probably didn't realise, because, like I said, I'd perfected the art of doing it. And so it just felt normal to me. But, when I look back now, I was drinking too much. I was using wine to wind down in the evenings. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't exercising well. And I don't mean, I don't mean extreme exercises, but I wasn't getting outside. I wasn't walking. I wasn't sleeping well. And when it got really bad, I was crying all of the time. My moods, extreme mood swings. I would snap at the easiest thing. At work, what I found most difficult at work, one of the hardest menopausal symptoms for me was brain fog, forgetting things, not being able to get my words out. I'd be sitting in a meeting and I'd know what I wanted to say, but I couldn't think of the word, and I would say, I don't know what the word is. And I'd laugh at myself, and then afterwards think, why am I laughing at myself? This is a real thing. So, and I was getting up at 6 o'clock every morning, not too bad, but I was leaving the house at 6:30. So I wasn't having any breakfast before I left to go to work. It was a quick shower, washed, dressed, makeup on, out of the house. And then I'd have a croissant when I got to work and a cup of coffee. And that just went on for years, really.
So we're sort of like, and I definitely relate to this experience, right? Working all hours, then ending up, especially when I was in the corporate world, ending up in the pub in the evenings just to have that respite, just to have that, it's almost like this numbing process.
Yes.
And even now I find that this sort of pattern is deeply etched in my brain. So when I'm stressed, I'll go, let's go and get some wine and have a glass of wine. And I really have to be conscious about what I'm doing, because I've got this pattern that's like stress. Oh, I need a glass of wine. And then a glass of wine becomes a bottle of wine. And then the next day I'm feeling foggy, and it's sort of this horrible negative cycle. And it's just being reinforced.
Yeah.
Wendy, I know that we've talked about the busy badge of honor and Superwoman, and I'd love to talk about your experiences of what Superwoman is and sort of what happened to you whilst you were sort of operating in that mode, and this busy badge of honor. Let's explain it to people, where we're at in terms of the corporate world.
I think so the first thing, when I came across one of many, first of all, so when I went to the very first conference that I went to, I remember being in a room, and it was quite early on. It might have been their first conference, actually. So there was probably not as many, well, there certainly wasn't as many women as there are now at the conferences. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is it. This is how it's meant to be. And it was just, it's really hard to articulate. I think Superwoman for me was all about integrating into an environment that I knew wasn't the natural me. It was doing things that were expected of me. It was saying the right things. It was doing the right things. It just wasn't authentic at all. It was, hiding the emotions that as women we feel. It was numbing. That's a great word. It was numbing all of the, I guess the way that I explain the kind of old paradigm of showing up is this kind of linear way. And I've talked before about, time management. Lots of time management principles are based on this linear aspect, that it assumes that our energy is very linear, that we can apportion time across the day to a given task. But actually, in truth, for humans, actually not just women, our energy is very cyclical. And so Superwoman for me was about always having to show up in this linear fashion. It was always having to be on and consistent and busy. And there was no time for retreating. There was no time for a bit of slowness, no time for thinking as opposed to doing. It was just this linear approach to everything. And then when I found one of many and found, different ways of doing it, that just started to feel much more natural and authentic.
I completely relate to that. I think Superwoman for me, I came from the events industry, went into project management, sort of very, very fast-paced environments, and operating in Superwoman was, for one, I was operating in an environment that required it. Like I was required to work up there, at that level all the time. And then when I wasn't, I was at the pub drinking and numbing to sort of just get off this sort of high buzz, just to sort of wind down a bit. And Superwoman for me was, if I wasn't operating in her, I suddenly felt like I'd lost something. I was constantly in this fight flight mode of high caffeine. As long as I'm up here, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And the problem for me was when I realized how I was treating my husband. It was my boyfriend at the time, but it was like, I was in a loving relationship, but I wasn't there, and I was treating him like a project, and I was treating our relationship like a project, and I was treating my entire life like that's a project, I'm going to manage you. And I was like, she was just taking over, and she was like, right, I'll give you 15 minutes and then I'm going to go. And I think that really made me stop. And I was like, do I want to be, is this the woman I want to be? Like just giving my, my husband like 15 minutes of my time and then shooting off. And when I'm with him, all I'm thinking about are the 100 things that I've got to do. And that's where it really stopped for me, where I realized, like, do I want this version of success? Is this, and this is the only thing I'd seen, there was very few women in my organization in terms of on those senior levels. So I didn't have a huge amount of role models in doing it any other way. And I've got to admit, I looked at those women and I thought, no, like that's not the type of woman I want to be. They're incredible, inspiring, but they're exhausted and they're consumed. They're at work on weekends. And it really it was a universe sort of shake.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the culture, I think, that we've been, that was what was expected of us. It was almost, if you want to join this game, you've got to play by these rules.
Yes.
And actually the rules need to change.
It's so hard when you're, because it's easy. It's almost like I remember me on the other side thinking, gosh, it's easy to say, like, how can you, when you're operating in an environment, right? How do you not go along with the game? How do you not follow? Because if you don't, then you fail. If you don't, then you're not one of the people that succeed, because the people that succeed are working all hours and operating as superwoman or superman, and, you know, are very competitive, and, you know, this very sort of what they call like masculine sort of energy. But the problem is that when we try to fit ourselves into that, and superwoman is that what comes out, there are problems for us females when we're operating from that place.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, you know, she's great. She's efficient. She's effective. She gets stuff done, doesn't she? But she's not sustainable. And this is what we were chatting about earlier. This is where, you know, this is where the testosterone fueled energy comes from. And ultimately, when you then get to perimenopause, you know, you've just not got the energy left for your body to then do what it needs to do through that next phase of your life.
So explain that for me, Wendy. So if we're operating in that space of sort of superwoman, lots of testosterone, like that male energy, the problem is if we're doing it for too long, our bodies sort of say no. Later on, it will go, no, you've played around too long now. I'm not going to perform in the way that I should.
That's how I've understood it. So, you know, I want to caveat it with I'm not a menopause expert. I'm not a health expert. But my experience of it was, and what I learned through my own menopausal journey was, so the way that I'd been showing up right from the start of my career was this superwoman. You know, I although I couldn't label it at the time, I was operating from superwoman, and she's very testosterone fueled. And of course, we do have some testosterone, but we don't have as much testosterone as men do. And my understanding of menopause is that as we enter the menopause phase, our hormone levels change. I think it's the estrogen levels that drop. And up until that point, they have been also regulating stress. So because we don't have as much testosterone as men, our other hormones kick in to regulate the stress. When we hit menopause and when those levels drop, my understanding is that the adrenal glands then kick in. But because I'd been overdoing it in Superwoman, and I'd used up all my can't think of, so here we are, another word, I can't get the word out. Because I'd used up all of my reserves of testosterone, and my adrenal glands were just not equipped to kick in, so they couldn't kick in and do what they're meant to do. And so that's when I started to topple and started to get really extreme symptoms of exhaustion and overwhelm. I don't call it burnout, because my understanding of burnout is that is specifically related to the work environment. And actually there was so many factors that you know, combined. So I call it extreme exhaustion and overwhelm. But I'd not taken care of myself, and so by the time it kicked in, my body just kind of collapsed in on itself, really. Not literally, but
it felt like overwhelmed.
And I mean, I couldn't, you know, I couldn't get out of bed one morning. I had to take time off work. You know, there was a few months where I thought, crikey, you know, what's going to happen? And it was a big wake up call.
I bet. And you know, we see this, just to go back to, you know, we are cyclical as women. I definitely didn't appreciate that. We've talked in the group quite a lot about periods and productivity, and you know, but you know, I really just didn't appreciate that need to understand my cycle, and that my productivity was going to change, and that I needed to be accepting of that. And I would be, you know, the week before my period, and I would just be angry with myself, you know, berating myself as to why I don't have the energy that I had, you know, a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago. And I was constantly trying to drive myself, and then I would just plummet. and then I'd have to pick myself up again. I'm like, okay, I'm going, and then I'd plummet again. It'd be this superwoman high, caffeine, and then I would just fall into exhaustion.
Yeah. And the thing is, there's power in each part of our cycle. So I think, it goes back to this, we think it has to be this linear thing, but actually if we really become attuned and aligned with our own cycle, there's power in each phase of it. So you might not have the energy to do X, but actually you've got the energy to do Y. And this is where the real power in being a woman is. And it's about embracing it, really.
Absolutely. I think initially I was just a bit like skeptical. I was a bit like, I don't want to talk about my periods. Like, I want to work, I want strategies, I want success. And I really sort of rejected this idea that my period was anything, or that it caused me any issues, or not even issues, but that it had anything to do with my work or my productivity or my energy. I certainly wouldn't want to admit that at work, because it was sort of seen as that makes you a woman. It highlights the fact that you are a woman, you're weaker, you're less than, you can't keep up, you can't do as much. And so it was really difficult for me to unlayer some of those beliefs and expectations, and sort of now it really does feel very, very empowering. It really does.
And I felt exactly the same. I started work in the 80s, when we all went to work with great big shoulder pads.
I love it. Do you still have one? Tell me you saved one.
No.
Okay, so when do you realize there was a problem? You sort of got your first glimpse of some tools that you could potentially sort of help, or understood some of what was happening, really. You got the label of Superwoman, you understand some of the stuff. So let's talk about how we can realistically, what can we do, right? What can we do? We're operating in an environment of overwhelm, of overwork, of there's a burnout pandemic almost. How can we live with ease and flow when the world around us is chaotic, superwoman charged, and there's lots of pressures around us?
The first thing I would say is slow down as much as you can. And even, I guess, just to feel that in your body, to just slow down. And in many respects, I think now is a good time, because I think particularly in organisations, there's a big focus on well-being. And whilst my experience comes from, being a woman, actually this stuff is for all of us. It's for, human beings. Let's shift from being human doings to human beings. So, slow down, get outside more. Even if it's just 5-10 minutes, just get outside and feel the elements around us. And one of the things that I'm doing now, and it's still very much in its experimental phase, but is really tuning into the energies of each of the seasons, and taking the overarching energy of that season, and then thinking, okay, how can I help this inform how I'm going to show up for this season? So, for example, winter, which we're in now, and winter is all about slowing down. It's all about stillness. It's all about retreating. It's all about self-growth and preparing for the spring, the new year ahead. And actually, although we're emerging into spring now, I committed last year not to do my planning for the year in January, which is typically when we might do that, because January is still the dead of winter. So I'm doing my planning in March, in spring. So winter for me hasn't been a complete hibernation, although I'd love it to be. It's one of my aspirations. but it was about creating moments of stillness. So in the busyness, in the day where we've still got to work, we've still got to earn a living, we've still got to feed the family, look after the kids, whatever we've got to do, how can I create moments of stillness? And getting outside is how I do it. Journaling is how I do it. Taking 5 minutes throughout the day is how I do it. And just having a focus in my mind of, I'm just going to be a bit slower in my approach to things. And then spring, I'll then plan for the year, and spring is much more of a vibrant energy. Spring is much more, it's youthful, it's playful, it's let's get out and try new things and do new things. So that's what I'm experimenting with at the moment, is the overarching energy of each season, and how can we help that inform our focus for those few months of that season.
And I love that. And I think, often when we sort of initially, I know there will be a lot of people sort of saying, well, there's a lot I don't have control over. I don't have control when there are peak times at work, or if my boss puts something on my desk. And that's true. And there will be, portions of your career and your life that you are not in control of, but there are large portions that we are, and we have to be we have to take responsibility for that time. And we talk a lot in my groups about energy management. Forget time management. It's about managing your energy with the time. There's only a limited amount of time, but your energy and how you use it, you have control over. You can control, if you know that there's going to be a big meeting, but it is winter and it is this time for, self-reflection and self-growth. How can you work your own time around that, and your, the time around those big deadlines, so that you're working in that energy? Yeah.
And sometimes it can be physically how we're showing up as well. Just feel the different energy in your body. When you think about when you think about the energy of winter, it's kind of inward, and it's a bit slower, and yet spring is. So I think even just feeling it in your body means that you can present yourself slightly differently as well, and embody a bit more of the energy, rather than embodying this busyness all of the time.
Yeah, I think it also, Wendy, it sort of gives me permission. Sometimes I feel like right now, I am, the week before my period, I'm on day 28, so my period is coming up. And I do find myself low on energy, low on productivity, the weather's bad. I'm feeling like, and I do get into these cycles of berating myself because because I am a high energy person.
Yeah.
But I really do. I get into this sort of like, what is wrong with you? And I've heard it with a couple of my clients. They're like, I don't know what's wrong with me. And it's this sort of negative cycle that we get ourselves into.
And I talk about, energy. When we think of energy, we do think of this kind of high energy, don't we? When we say, oh, we've got energy, it's this, doing and bouncy. But actually, once you get really clear on your cycles, you will have energy, but you'll have energy for something else. And that energy might be for going inwards and thinking and journaling and reflect. This might be the time for you to create some wonderful stuff, or to just imagine it, to dream it, as opposed to the doing. So I talk to my clients about, you will have energy for something, but it's just not for what you think it's going to be. And that's where you find the power in, energy is about power. It's about, being the impetus to something. So what's the impetus that you have? What is it that you're being drawn to in that moment?
I really love that, because whilst I know that we shouldn't need permission to rest, it is that reminder to me, this sort of there is a natural rhythm to things. There is the natural world, and it's evolved, and it's existed for so long. There's a reason why, right? It's sustainable. And I think the more I understand that, the sort of better I feel about it. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wendy. So guys, if you do have any questions, stick those in the chat box, and if we can't get to them today, we will definitely get those back to you. So if you're watching this on the replay as well, do stick your questions in. Wendy, thank you so much. But just before we finish, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they find out more?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. So I'm on Facebook, Wendy Aspland Business is my Facebook page. On LinkedIn, Wendy Aspland, and my website is wendyaspland.com.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for spending this evening with me.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're both probably gonna finish this, have a cup of tea, go straight to bed.
Go to bed. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.